Welcome to A Voice and Beyond. Today we have a very special guest. We have Andrea Arlington, all the way from LA, and you are stunning. You are just such a typical LA looking perfection person.
You, Marissa.
Now, you are a trauma informed certified ICF professional life coach, an author, a minister, former television personality, and a former model. You also do work as an interventionist. I have to say that again, interventionist. That's a bit tricky, that word. So, what is an interventionist?
An interventionist is somebody who intervenes in families or in individuals' lives when they're struggling with different mental health or addiction issues.
Right. Now, from what I have learned from your story, your family has dealt with addiction, mental health issues, and homelessness. Do you want to share your family story and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So I grew up in the Midwest here in the United States, and my childhood was, I guess, I grew up in a middle class home with a professional father and a mother who struggled with self esteem. And I always think of her as this beautiful, but very vulnerable, almost delicate bird, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Think back at my childhood, and the family home was very cold, and there was no closeness in the relationships, and it was really hard for me as a little girl who wanted to have love and affection and connection, because my nature is very much about connecting with people. It always has been, and yet in my family of origin, that was not comfortable for the adults in my family, and it was definitely discouraged. Any kind of emotional connection was discouraged. So by the time I was 14, I left home. I moved out, and I ended up moving in with a gay man who taught me how to walk and talk and dress and model. And that launched me into a career as an international fashion model, which lasted for over a decade. And
Wow.
yeah, and during that time, I dated a lot of, rock stars and wealthy men, and did a lot of drugs and partying. And when I was 21, I lost my brother to drugs and alcohol. And
Oh,
that was the beginning of my understanding of how dangerous it is to be somebody who struggles with emotional and mental health and uses substances to self-medicate, which is what he was doing. He was 17 when he died. And my parents had known that he was struggling with substances, but of course, back at that time and even today, um, there's a stigma around it. And
yes.
my brother's case, my he wasn't able to tell my parents that he was actually shooting drugs. He was only able to share with them that he felt like he had a problem with alcohol. And my parents' response was, "Well, you should just pretend that you're drinking. So pour the alcohol out in the back of a planter at a party, for instance," is what he was told, "and fill your beer can with water and
Mm.
just act cool," right? But really what he needed was somebody to feel safe enough to say, "I have a problem with shooting cocaine, and I've been doing it for 6 months," and on and on. So that never happened, and eventually he died of a drug and alcohol related car accident.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and
wow. I'm so
that was
sorry.
well, thank you, but, I feel like his death was really something that woke me up to, my spiritual practices. I started studying Marianne Williamson's work. I started, reading Buddhism and Jungian teachings,
Mhm.
and other spiritual practices. And eventually I met and married a man in Los Angeles because I came out here to continue my career as a model and start acting. and it turned out after about 2 years of living with him and getting married that I realized that he also was struggling with a substance problem. And at first I just thought, "Oh, we're just having fun. He's so handsome and
Mm-hmm.
he's successful and all these things." And as it turns out, he had strong changes in his personality when he drank. And over time, he also revealed that he had problems with other women, dating other women while we were married. And I had two little girls when he met a young woman and left our family. And over time, he became homeless because his drugs and alcohol use was so intense. He lost his
Mm-hmm.
career. Lost his career. And then, as I was raising my daughters as a single woman, struggling with their dad being homeless and my own mental health, and which had never been real good, let me just say, because I wouldn't have never left home if I was really that well inside, and I didn't have any real healthy role modeling either. So as an adult, I was sort of navigating life with this unwell mental health. I was very insecure and really felt lost in the world. And I was out in California all by myself. I didn't have any friends or family when I moved out here. And when you're in a relationship with somebody who struggles with mental health and addiction, sometimes you tend to isolate because you don't want any
Yes.
outside world to know that you're
Yes.
got this going on because it feels
100%.
right. I
Mm-hmm.
felt ashamed. I
Mm-hmm.
felt ashamed and I felt scared and I didn't know how to have a relationship with people because I was so distraught inside. So anyway, over time, um, I started re-engaging in smoking weed to self-medicate from the stress that I felt as a single mom. And it was really hard for me to be available to my daughters emotionally because I was unable to hold space for myself to feel okay emotionally.
Yes.
And
How old were you at this stage?
I was in my early 30s when
Still
my husband,
young.
yeah, very young.
Mm.
And so, but my daughters started using weed when they were in their in middle school ages. And I honestly was okay with it, which I regret very much today. But I had started smoking weed when I was 12. And because of my lack of self-awareness, even in my mid 30s, I I never had really gone back and thought, oh, I'm really not very healthy mentally,
Mm.
even though somehow I just went through my life from that time that I started smoking weed. And of course, that really stigmatizes or stunts, excuse me, your prefrontal cortex development, right? When you
Yes.
start. So I had the mentality really of like a 12-year-old raising kids, apparently. That's really what they say is that you sort of stop developing emotionally at the age you start using.
Mm.
And not only, go ahead.
Yes. Was it legalized at that stage? Because I do know that the state of California is very liberal and marijuana has been legalized there. Was it legalized at the time?
Medically. You could get a medical prescription.
Mm-hmm.
It was not hard to do, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Not hard at all. And so my children were smoking weed and I was okay with it. And in fact, I'll be honest, I felt like, "Oh my god, thank God they have something to help them numb their." I wasn't consciously thinking this, but there was a part of me that was really aware of the fact that, "Oh
Mm.
god, thank God," because they were so overwhelming for me emotionally to hold space for them to have their emotions about their dad being homeless and about my youngest daughter was time and she was struggling with her self-esteem issues, and I didn't have any family out in California and still was struggling with self-esteem and self-worth. So bottom line is my oldest daughter started doing drugs when she was like heavier drugs when she was
Heavier.
14. She had a surgery and she started taking prescription opioids to recover. She had a double foot surgery. And that was very painful. And when she started taking, she told me later, when she started taking the opiates, she felt like she was safe for the first time in her life emotionally. And she craved that feeling, and so therefore she craved those substances. And over time she started using opioids more frequently and was dating a dealer who was, yeah, 17 and she was 16.
Oh,
And I didn't know that she was doing those drugs. I really thought she would smoke weed and that was it. But eventually she ended up getting involved with an unhealthy crowd of kids, and was later identified and arrested as being the head of the Bling Ring burglaries, which were a group of teenagers here in Southern California that burglarized Paris Hilton's home, Orlando Bloom's home, and Lindsay Lohan's, and multiple other celebrities. And she was identified as being the head of that, even
oh,
though it's very clear that she wasn't. But eventually, Sofia Coppola made a movie about that, about the Bling Ring kids, and Emma Watson played my daughter Alexis Nyers in the movie, which was, you know, not very great.
and
Our whole family was
sorry,
like, "Go ahead."
no, you didn't know any of this was going on.
Oh my God, no, no,
So,
because
so you at that point of time, were you in like in emotional distress? You were traumatized yourself through the circumstance that you were finding yourself in?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I did get remarried when Alexis was 12 and my youngest daughter was 10, and I had a foster daughter who lived with us off and on since the time she was 4 years old.
Mm,
And she and my older daughter were like gasoline and fire, constantly finding shenanigans to get involved with, boys, drugs, men, Hollywood, Malibu. Like, they were both beautiful, beautiful girls,
mm,
and were, captivated by the public eye, and in the celebrity sort of world a little bit in Hollywood and Beverly Hills. And we ended up getting a reality show on E! Entertainment because the girls got discovered in Hollywood by a producer, and who
oh,
thought they thought that the
sorry.
yeah, it was crazy, right? And
What a story.
so the whole thing, my daughter's whole criminal case and everything was aired on national television and actually around the world, but it was never meant to be about the she was in Hollywood and with her sister, the
Mm.
girl taken in, and this producer said, "You girls are hilarious. Like, what do you do, and what's your mom all about?" And they're like, "Oh, my mom teaches us the law of attraction. That's why we've manifested." They were shooting a movie, actually. They were playing fraternal twins in a movie, and this producer met them on the set. And there he was like, You guys are hilarious. I'd like to talk to your mom." And at the time I was really struggling in my marriage. My husband was really unhappy with the girl's behavior. He was, of course, their stepfather, and
Mhm.
I was checked out. I was taking acting classes. I wanted to get back in front of the camera again. My kids were getting older. They were getting close to graduation from high school. I didn't know that they were doing these crazy drugs, but I did know that as a teenager and as a young adult, I had hung out with musicians and actors and was comfortable doing that myself. And I still didn't identify the lack of I guess wisdom, or
Yes.
just didn't have
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I just didn't have it. So, eventually my daughter, her opioid use, going through the criminal case, she became a full-blown heroin addict. So she was
Oh.
shooting heroin, and she got arrested and went to jail for burglarizing Orlando Bloom's home. She got out of jail and got back into um, self-medicating with heroin and got arrested again and was facing her second felony when she was 19 and was looking at 6 years in prison, um, if she yeah, if the judge convicted her, right? And if the
Hmm.
DA had their way. But as it turned out, the judge was 25 years sober. And he gave her the chance to go into treatment for 12 months and then to do 3 years of probation. And as long as she stayed clean, she wouldn't have to go to prison. And she was 19 years old at the time. And thankfully, an amazing man who owned a treatment center agreed to be responsible for her recovery and took her under his wing and helped her for those 12 months. And I was still so mentally unwell myself. I mean, her treatment team said to her after she was there for about 30 days, "Your mom is not allowed to come and visit you," because I was so unhealthy. I was like, "She's more fucked up, excuse me, than she was when she was using heroin. You guys have her so drugged out." And I was trying to control and manipulate what was not in my power to do, nor was I competent at managing my own life, much less hers, and it wasn't until she was a couple of years sober and said to me, "Mom, I might have been the heroin addict, but you're the one with the problem." That I
Oh,
yeah, that was a
yes,
big moment for me, and she was right, but I was so hurt by that. At first, I was like, "How dare you?
of course.
Dare you?" And but she was so right, and I felt so broken, and my husband had left, and my life was a nightmare. I was losing my house, and I hadn't had a career ever except for being in front of the camera. And, at age, I think I was 48 at the time when all of this was going down, that I didn't see, there was no chance. And my reputation, I mean, I was all over the news with my daughter, and we were in the newspapers and on the news. And so basically, I didn't know what was going to happen. I really felt like I didn't have any future. My kids weren't talking to me. I had sort of avoided connecting with anybody for years.
Mm.
I was living in a state of complete drama, trauma, and mental unwellness. And then somebody said to me, "There's a woman I really think you would benefit from working with." And I was like, "Oh, okay," because I didn't know what else I was going to do. I really literally felt completely paralyzed and didn't know if I even wanted to live.
Mm. Wow. That sounds like a Hollywood movie. All of that. It doesn't, it, I mean, it just doesn't sound real.
Well,
There's
it
just so much
was real.
drama. That actually was a real roller coaster of a story because there was some amazing highlights in there, like your amazing 10-year modeling career. But amidst all that is so much trauma and drama and
Yeah.
leading a double life. It's
Oh,
like the person that you were showing to the world was not the person that you truly were and what was going on inside of you. And when you grow up in drama and trauma, it's almost like you don't know any different. And probably for your, not only you, but for your daughter,
yeah.
she probably didn't know any different either. It's like, oh, yeah, this is just how life is. This is what we do.
That's exactly right. Not only that, but like your neural pathways in your brain that are developed through your thought processes, your belief system, and so forth, they produce chemicals in the body that are called biochemicals, right? So when you're dealing with drama and trauma, you're constantly getting a chemical cocktail of different
Yeah. Like dopamine.
hormones and dopamine and
Yeah.
serotonin. and
Mm-hmm.
norepinephrine and oxytocin and cortisol and all of these different things that you literally get addicted to that cocktail. And when things start to feel good, your body goes through withdrawal from that emotional cocktail that you're so addicted to because it's been around for so long. And what happens is it's just like an addict going through withdrawal from alcohol or any other drug.
Mm-hmm.
You actually crave a
Mm-hmm.
dramatic experience, or you'll remember, if you will, events that have happened in order to get that cocktail, that chemical cocktail. And there's all sorts of books that are written about that as well. So
Mm.
that what really is going on is we think we're thinking, and but the truth is that our bodies are actually yelling up to our brain, quick, have a thought about X, Y, and Z so that I can get my chemical cocktail needs met. So you choose relationships, you choose people, you enter into relationships with people, whether they know it or not, with you playing out old
Mm.
roles and patterns because you're not aware of the fact that you're addicted to a chemical cocktail and it's causing you to act out in these ways. And I finally, through working with that woman, understood the massive amount of dysfunction I was dealing with and what I needed to do to change my brain and to change my neural pathways and to heal my heart and to feel whole and to
Mm.
feel no longer feel like I had to manipulate and control other people. I learned how to take care of myself and to love myself, which has been a long journey, right? I'm turning
Mm.
60, this year, so it's been
Wow.
about
You
15
look
years.
amazing.
Thank you.
You
Um,
do. You have to
thank
tell me the name of people in LA.
you, right? I have some great caretakers. But anyway, yeah, so it really it's been a hard, long journey. But the good news is that my daughter and her husband, they're no longer married, but they're still good friends. They were married for 10 years. She got married when right after she got out of jail, she met him. I'm sorry, right after she got out of treatment, she met him.
Yes, this is
And
Alexis.
Alexis, yeah.
Yeah.
And she has two beautiful daughters. I have five grandchildren. My daughters are healthy. They're well. Her husband and she opened up a treatment center in Malibu that Newsweek has rated the #1 mental health and dual diagnosis treatment center in the country 2 years in a row now. And
That is fantastic news. So something amazing has come from all of that.
exactly. And
Yes.
I started after I worked with that woman for 3 years. I went through a couple of training programs to become a mental health expert focused on family recovery from addiction, mental health issues, all sorts of certifications and training in relationship healing and
Yes.
communication and all that great stuff. And especially like I learned how to talk to myself
Mm.
in a way that is kind and compassionate and with a lot of empathy and care. I had to reparent myself essentially,
Mm.
because I didn't have a relationship with my parents really ever. I
Yes,
so much.
because you do talk about generational trauma. That's one of the things that you have mentioned to me when we had our pre-interview meeting. So what is generational trauma? And was your mum a part of your generational trauma, or did it start with you and then you handed it down to your children?
So it's so really interesting. Generational trauma can be looked at. So if you, I don't know if you're familiar with a genogram, but if you look at like the last four generations of your family, you'll find in most of the individuals in America, the families in America, that we came from other countries, that four generations back when our relatives were arriving here in the United States, they were poor, they were struggling, they were homeless. They um they had left their
Mm.
families, their countries, and they were living through trauma, right? These
Mm.
young adults mostly, right? And so nobody was here to greet them and hold space for them and take them in and make them feel safe. We're talking 4 generations back, right?
Yes.
So 300 years ago, right? And they were dealing with illness and disease and all sorts of things. So those family members, they were married and they had children, and those children were raised by families, by parents who were not well mentally because they were traumatized from what happened 4 generations back, or even 5
Mm.
generations back.
Yeah.
And studies show that addiction becomes it really starts to show up significantly in about the 4th generation, which is the generation of my children, right? Um,
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's part of the work that I do with families as I help them look at, okay, so where did great grandpa and grandma come from? How many children were in their family? Did they lose a child to disease or at childbirth? Was there mental illness? Was there transition happening? Was there trauma? Did they get moved across the country? How old were they?
Mhm.
Did they graduate? Most of the grandparents in my family didn't have more than an elementary school education,
Yeah.
okay? You can imagine, how do you feed a family when you only have that and you feel incompetent and you feel stressed and it's not, you're not mentally well, right? So my dad and my mom came from families that struggled, with mental health, with illness, with poverty. And so my father was driven from the time he was a little boy to compensate for the poverty in his family by becoming so highly educated. He had a PhD. He wrote books and taught at universities around the world. And his priority was educating people so that their families wouldn't suffer the way that his family of origin did. But in the meantime, my family was neglected. Like his own children suffered the undealt with trauma that he had, that he was trying to compensate for by becoming this expert. He was the vice dean of the business school at UW in Wisconsin and Madison. Then he had a $2 million research chair at University of Texas Austin, and all of these things that he accomplished as a businessman, professor, were
Mm.
so admirable. And yet he lost a son to drug addiction, and he lost me to, my own just inability to survive in that environment where he wasn't present and my mom was ignored, basically.
Mm.
She had lost her dad when she was 8, and there's all trauma on her side of the family. And so we're looking at generational trauma and how it affected me. And then I met and married their father, whose mother suffered from MS and mental illness, and um, came from a family of origin that was very unhealthy. And then his father had 10 siblings, and 8 of them were put into an orphanage. So, talk about trauma, right? And then he was
That's a
raised,
lot.
right? He was raised by 2 very unwell parents. And of course, he was seeking love and he sought it through sex, right? So he was a sex addict,
Oh,
um, and a drug addict because he was dealing with his own like levels of shame and childhood trauma. So I'm sharing all of this because now I look at my life and now I can have compassion for myself, right? Because
yes.
hated myself.
Mm.
I hated myself
Mm.
because of uh the parenting that I had done and the fact that I couldn't find a relationship that worked for me. And I wasn't a healthy partner, and I didn't choose healthy men because I was broken. And you don't choose healthy men. If you did have a healthy man around, he wouldn't want to be with you if you're broken the way I was, right?
Mm.
And so yeah, it's been a long journey. This trauma is
Yes.
generational. And so the work that I do with families who have mental health issues and addiction issues, is is to help them find compassion for themselves and look at their genograms, understanding how these generational problems have contributed to their child or their own addiction. It changes everything because when the compassion and empathy are activated in the family,
Mm.
that's when healing and transformation happens, and it's amazing.
Oh my gosh. That is incredible. And I can relate to so much of what you just said. And I didn't realize, like, you just, I had so many aha moments through that because my own family were migrants to Australia and they
Oh,
both went through the Second World War. My father was in the Second World War
wow.
and they went through so much trauma. My mum was from a family of 11. Most of her siblings died when they were young from illnesses that now there are ways to, there's medication that we can take to prevent those illnesses causing mortality. They were uneducated, totally uneducated. Where they came from was a small island
Oh,
in the
wow.
Tyrrhenian Sea. There was no hospital, there was no doctor, there was no school. And my father's mother passed away when he was 2 weeks old from mastitis. So,
Oh
and
my gosh.
so
Oh
they
my
came to
god.
this country, and my
Right?
mother she was very mentally unwell. And
Sure.
I was born to take her mind off herself. That was the advice the doctor gave her was,
Oh
you
my
know
god.
what? Go and have a baby and and forget about take your mind off yourself. So I was born with the job of being that
Exactly.
object to make my mum happy. So I was
You had to perform.
responsible. Mm.
You had to perform for her to keep her happy.
Yes,
Yes.
and everything that was a problem was my fault. And
Yep.
but I haven't just seen it in my own immediate, like my brother has his own ways of dealing with things because he went through his own traumas. But
Yeah.
my cousins who came from the same bloodline,
Yeah.
there's so much anxiety in our family. There's
Yeah.
so much anxiety.
There is. Yeah. And that's
And I
generational.
and I've thought to myself, it's only since I've gotten to speak to my cousins on a deeper level that I found this out.
Wow.
Because we don't realize when we're kids, we don't know how we're feeling and why we're feeling the way that we do. But
No.
it's been very interesting. One of my cousins in particular, she has suffered so badly from anxiety that she doesn't drive a car. She hasn't had a job for years. She's
Mhm.
had intestinal cancer. It's manifested into cancer. And she immediately goes into high alert.
Oh
You could
yeah.
say to her, "Oh, I'm going to be going overseas. Oh my gosh, you want to be careful." And she doesn't mean it
Yeah.
to dramatize. She is
Yeah.
actually worried that
Yeah.
something
No.
is going to happen.
Completely. Yeah, I struggle with it's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic PTSD, right?
Yes.
It's the tiny T traumas, not the big huge, like car accident trauma, although that was what it was originally with your parents, right?
Mm,
Um moving and seeing their mom die or not having a mom and seeing their siblings die, right? And
mm.
so there's that big T trauma, but then we as the younger generation, like my dad would never acknowledge that I had trauma from my childhood. Never. As long as
Mm.
there was a roof over your head, food on the table, and clothes on your back, you're good and they're done with their responsibility, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that was the way I was raised, and in a sense, that was the way I raised my girls. Now it's so interesting because my 11-year-old granddaughter is living with me temporarily because her mom took a job in the city and she wanted to stay out here and finish her 5th grade and her dance program. And so I'm loving this, by the way.
Amazing. Yes.
Love it.
Is this Alexis' daughter?
Alexis's oldest daughter. Yeah,
Okay.
Harper.
So,
Yeah.
how's your relationship with Alexis now? Because I know that for some time it
Yeah,
was
same.
not good.
Not good at all. She didn't trust me emotionally because everything that I did, she felt was transactional. Like I would only do things if it was going to benefit me. And I fully admit, very narcissistic as a mom, as a
Mm,
wife, as a partner, as a woman,
mm,
because and narcissism is often driven by emotional neglect because we become super sensitive to the fact that we don't have our emotional needs met, right? And so we are constantly living out of that fight, flight, freeze area of the brain, like your cousin.
mm,
Um, because we have to be on high alert that, oh my god, something is going to come and it's going to disrupt my well-being, or nobody's going to save me, no one's going to rescue me, I have to take care of myself. So my parenting with my daughter, even through just all of her trauma, was so all about me. It was so just so sad. I mean, that my poor daughter was so traumatized by me as her mom. I'm so sorry. I can't apologize enough. But
yes,
but,
yes. But you
John,
were doing your best from what you knew and from where you had come from. You were in survival mode
I was.
24/7.
So was your
Which,
mom, right?
yes, yes. And I had to forgive my mum also. Not that she really understood what was going on,
Right.
but she passed away 2 years ago, and we had a wonderful relationship. And the funny thing was, she never worried about me. She always worried about my older brother, who's 11 years older than me. And I used to say to her, Mum, why don't you worry about me? Why are you always worried about my brother? Like, he's old enough to know better. He
Yeah.
he's doing fine, but you're always worrying about him. And
Yeah.
then I had a session. This may sound woo woo, and I apologize to some of the listeners who think this is a little bit left of center. But I had a session with, oh my gosh, I can't remember. It was some sort of coach who was a medium as well.
Yeah.
Wasn't a transformational coach. It was, anyway, I can't remember the name of the type of coaching that she does, but
Mhm.
she calls in all the spirit guides and and intuitive coach.
Oh,
And
okay.
yes, and my mum came to this healing session, and my mum said that she always knew that I was strong and that I
Okay.
was resilient.
Oh,
And
wow.
she apologized for everything that she had put me through, because she realized how much it had messed me up in
I'm
my
sure.
own personal relationships, because I always felt that I had to be the person to take care of everybody. And I hadn't learned how to receive in life.
Completely. Same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and oftentimes I was caretaking other people in order to feel safe myself because they wouldn't leave me or they would love me if I proved myself enough to them,
Yes,
right?
I get that. I
Yeah.
get that. So
Like so
how we
yeah, I
yes.
do have a great relationship to answer your question with Alexis today. It took us a long time to get here, but we've
Mhm,
both done a lot of work and we did do some therapy together. And
mhm.
so yeah.
I know, because last time we spoke, which was maybe end of last year or early this year, you were still repairing that relationship. It still wasn't 100% repaired. So I'm so happy to hear that. And how important is it for us to repair those unhealed parts of us, to then repair the family dynamic with our own children?
It's critical. That's why I love doing those family genograms because when you look at the family genealogical history and the trauma in the family generations, then the family can come together and we can create a family message that sounds something like, my family is in pain. Our relationships feel polarized and difficult. And yet, looking at the family history, there's been a lot of resilience in our family because we survived, right? We survived through all of these traumas. And uh-huh, exactly. So we can draw from the strength of our family to now come together and make a decision that moving forward, we're going to heal the challenging belief systems and mental health patterns that we've carried forward up until now. We're going to heal those so that the next generation is really not impacted by the
Mhm.
generational trauma from before. And that's what I was about to say. My 11-year-old granddaughter, I was listening to her navigate a difficult conversation with a friend on the phone last night. There was actually 3 other kids on the phone with her, and she said to this one young girl, you know, I really care about you, but when you talk about my friend Jack in a hurtful way, it makes me feel really sad. And I love Jack and I want to be his friend and I want you to be my friend. But if you can't be nice to my other friends, I can't be friends with you. She was
Who
said
is this 11-year-old? That is
it was
incredible.
crazy. I was listening to it and I was so impressed, and I
Yes.
just I just thought to myself, "Look, she's setting boundaries, but she's so loving and kind and compassionate." And it was just beautiful. And then I listened to her get on a call with her mom and dad, who are divorced, but they love each other and they co-parent beautifully together. And they were both giving her a lot of encouragement and saying, you're so strong and you're so compassionate, and that's what is going to make you really successful in life. When
Mm,
people are dealing with struggles, you'll be compassionate, but you'll also set boundaries to protect yourself, which is basically what I failed to know how to do and didn't teach my kids that. But boy, my grandchildren are certainly learning that, and they have good healthy parents because of the work my daughters did. And also, my Alexis's former husband, he's been sober for like 17 years or more, and
mm,
just done a lot of work too. So that it can heal. Yes. So the answer to your question is, it's so important that we do the work for ourselves so that we can be involved in emotionally trusting relationships with other people, and we can also advocate for ourselves when we need time and
mm,
space to process things. I mean, it's not that I don't get triggered with my daughter and she
mm.
doesn't get triggered with me, but when I do, I have tools and strategies and support network of people that I depend on. I have a coach, I have a
Yeah.
coach to work with, and I have spiritual practices and I meditate, and I do a lot of reading and self-reflection and gratitude and all of the things that make me mentally healthy today. And
Mm, mm. I,
we all have to be responsible for our ability to emotionally regulate and find inner peace even when shit's hitting the fan.
yes. And so when clients come to you, who are the typical kind of people that come to you? What are some of the issues that are going on in their families
Oh, a lot
with
of times,
them?
yeah, a lot of times, parents are in disagreement on how to raise their children who are struggling with their own mental health or substance use issues. um Husbands and wives have their own challenges. There's lack of respect in the relationship, and contempt has developed over time because
Mm,
they don't know how to communicate in a loving and respectful way. So I teach a lot of communication strategies. I give people scripts to use to help flush out the unspoken discomfort and the unspoken feelings. People don't even realize what they're actually feeling until you learn how to ask questions that evoke the actions of the prefrontal cortex, essentially. Because when we're always living in the fight, flight, freeze, which a lot of my family members are, I would say 100%. The
Mm-hmm.
people that I work with are dealing with stress, and they're driven by unmet emotional needs often. And so when I help them identify, what is it that is driving you to feel this way and driving you to make these choices, and how can you support each other to um to feel seen and heard and loved and affirmed and still get your own needs met. And so
Mm.
that's a lot of what I deal with. But most of my clients right now are parents who have kids that are struggling with addiction. And my work in that area has been incredibly rewarding. I help parents get their kids who are homeless off of the street and into treatment. And but it's usually it requires learning how to drop the weapons, drop the anger, drop the resentment, no matter what's happened. Like,
Mm.
I've really been through a lot of trauma, and I could have spent the rest of my life being angry at my daughter for the trauma that I went through because of her choices, right?
Yes.
But I learned to, instead of being angry at her, I learned to take responsibility for my part in it. And I also learned to have compassion for why she felt driven to make the choices that she did. And, and so that's what I teach parents, how to have an understanding, to look deeper. No child says, I'm going to grow up and be a drug addict. And
Exactly.
I'm
Mm.
gonna screw up my life and everybody else is around me so that everybody hates me and I'm alone, which makes me wanna use even more, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we start dropping the weapons and actually understand the generational trauma, because we do the genograms with every family that I work with, and then we bring the family together and we start having conversations about what is the underlying need that's not being met here that causes you to wanna self-medicate, and how can we help you get your needs met, and not make you feel shame and self-loathing in the process. And a lot of times we do need expert help, right away for the addiction issues, because we're dealing with fentanyl. We're losing 318 people a day to overdose
Oh,
in our country, which is
so
one every 11
yeah.
minutes.
So who would be the youngest child and the parents have come in? What would be age would be the youngest case that you've had to work with?
14. 14.
14. And they
Yeah.
were homeless.
No, that child was not homeless. The youngest homeless child was 17. And but she is 6 years sober today, and she's a nurse. She's married and she's expecting her first child.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she struggled with bipolar and heroin and crystal meth addiction when she was homeless. So, that was I had the parents reach out to me, and within 29 days we had her off the street and in treatment. So it's not it's not always an exact science, but right away, when the parents start to stop trying to force the child to get sober, but instead focus on connecting with them and helping the child feel safe and not judged and not ashamed, that's when the child feels safe enough to be willing to receive help, and
Mm.
and to reconnect with the parents a little bit at a time. But oftentimes, because I'm able to talk with the child while they're struggling and tell them what I've been through with my own kids.
Mm.
My foster daughter was homeless for 2 years, living in downtown LA, and addicted to
That's rough.
heroin and crystal meth. So
Yeah.
I've been
Yes.
down that road, and essentially I was homeless too for 2 years when I first left home. Um, and
Yes.
so the kids can relate to me, I'm happy to say,
Mm.
and that's always lovely. I end up oftentimes working with the kids after they're out of treatment, just to continue to coach them on their journey of rebuilding the life that they were probably meant to have, but got sidetracked.
Yes, because it's one thing to get them off the street, but then you can't just leave them there.
Oh,
You've
no.
got to then have them assimilate back into society. And with that child who was homeless, who's now, one of your remarkable stories of healing, what were the needs that weren't being met for her, and what are usually the needs that these children are missing, that they're feeling like, I need this, but I'm not receiving it?
Well, she came from a broken home, and mom was a full-time employed, and dad was not mentally healthy, and was a substance user himself. And so there was big abandonment issues from the time she was a
Mm,
little girl from both parents. And uh then mom ended up getting remarried, and so there was this other person who took up a lot of mom's time. And she was the oldest of two girls. And you know eh, there was some, yeah, the father issue when he left the family, um was it was just a huge abandonment for her, because she was at an age where she was more aware of the big void that was caused. I think
mm,
she was like 6 when they split up, and her younger sister was only 2, so the adjustment for the younger child was easier.
yes.
um, and and so she grew up. There was some mental health issues in her mom's generation, as well. Her mom's sister had bipolar and became addicted to drugs and eventually took her own life. So
Oh my
that
gosh, that's a lot.
it is. And so Rachel's story, and I can tell you her name, is on my website under my testimonials. In a video, she talks about how when her mom started working with me, everything changed, and who she is today. And it's just amazing.
Well,
Uh,
you
go
are
ahead.
doing remarkable work, and you do have a communication video that we're going to share in the show notes too. So, in just starting to wrap this up, how can we foster loving and nurturing relationships within our family unit? What's some advice you can give us there?
Well, I would say that it's really important to do some self work. If you can really look at, the way that we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves as rescuers? Do we see ourselves as victims? Do we see ourselves as angry about unresolved, issues with other people? We have to work on healing our own state of mind,
Mm,
because if we are operating from any one of those three ego states, victim, rescuer, or persecutor, which is known as the drama triangle, in relationships, and that drama triangle exists in every family, especially those that are dealing with mental health and addiction issues. And really, I would say probably close to 1 out of 6 is, um,
mhm,
definitely dealing with that. So, that's one of the first things is, it's self-awareness, but you can't do it with your own mind. You have to look at what are the results I'm getting in my life. If they're not healthy, if they don't feel good to me, I have room to grow. It's like when my daughter said, "Mom, I might be the heroin addict, but you're the one with the problem." Well, she was right. I was going through my 3rd divorce, and I was only
yeah,
47.
yeah.
And my kids were not doing well, and I was the common denominator. I lost my brother to addiction. I had left home when I was 14, all of these things. So I tended to be a person who thought it was everybody else's fault, there was nothing wrong with me. But that was a self-protection thing as well. That was my armor, right? And if I could just look good and show up and pretend, then I would somehow be able to at least survive. And anyway, getting back to how do people heal their relationships? Well, you have to learn how to communicate with another person in a way that is supportive and loving and compassionate and kind. But if you don't feel safe, and if you're living from the fight, flight, freeze area of the brain, which so many of us are today with financial stress and all sorts of other stresses, it's really hard to have healthy relationships. And so it's a healing journey. It's healing the mind, body, and spirit through working with a coach, through work. That's what it took. I was working with her for 18 hours a month for 3 years. 3 years.
18 hours a month.
And, uh-huh. Yep.
I've never heard of that much coaching.
Well, I worked with her in a group on Saturdays for 8 hours. And then during the week, I'd work with her between 2 and 3 hours, just one-on-one coaching.
That's a lot of discipline in just showing up,
Yeah.
not just doing the work, but actually just getting yourself there to show up.
Well, what happened was I felt so broken that when I first started talking to her, and I felt like she really knew what I was going through because she was in recovery from alcoholism and sex addiction, and she was 85 years old, and she really had a lot to offer, right? I felt like, "Oh my god, somebody gets me," right?
Mm.
And then when I was in that group on Saturdays with other women and a couple of men too, that were all struggling with the same shit, like self-love and relationship stuff, I was like, "Oh, I'm in the right place.
Yes.
I can't not be here. I can't not be here." And it was a community. I created a community, or I felt like I belonged in that community of people who were willing to do the work. And I couldn't not do the work because they were doing the work, right? And so and I saw my relationships improving as I implemented these strategies and these new beliefs. And as that happened, it was like that kept me going too. It was like, oh, another $1,000 to spend another month in this program and see my relationship with my kids improve. Without a doubt, I'm doing that. You
Mm.
know, so it was inch meal. It wasn't like I signed up for 3 years at 18 hours a month. It was like I
No.
started a couple of hours a month, and it pretty soon it grew because I saw the improvements happening and I got more and more committed.
Mm. And the biggest thing that you just said, I believe, is that you didn't feel alone. You felt there were other people who understood and were going through the same thing that you were. And that's something that everyone needs to feel. That's our most common basic need, is to feel that we belong as human beings.
Totally. Yes. Yes.
Mm,
Yes.
mm. Okay. In all of this, because your story is massive, it is a massive, incredible story. Do you have any regrets? Or do you feel like everything that you've been through was all meant to happen so you could be where you're at right now in your life?
I think so. I think it was all meant to happen so I could be where I'm at right now, which
Mm,
isn't perfect. I'm not in a perfect place. There's stuff that I still work on every day. Um,
yeah, same.
but yeah, but it makes me good at what I do because there's nobody who can show up on my doorstep, if you will, or on my Zoom that I can't say, "Oh, dude, I get that." Been there, been there, or I'm going through that now and I can help you because boy, do I have some great tools, and that makes a
Incredible.
big difference. And I know you do that too with the work that you do. You help so many people find their joy and find and use great tools to get there. And that's what I love about coaching.
Yes, exactly. So anything else you wanted to add to this interview?
Um, no, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. We
Yes.
have way more than I was anticipating.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to have this call with me. And
Mm,
but if people would like to get it's a 30-minute downloadable video on my website, andreaarlington.com. And it really is life-changing. The communication tools that I go over, I actually go over the drama triangle and how to use language to change operating from those three different ego states, how to identify when you're in it and what you need to do to get out of it. And my daughter Alexis is actually in the entire video with me. We laugh about how messed up our relationship was and what we've had to do to overcome it. And it's really fun and it's good and it's funny and it will help the people who watch it.
Well, we'll have to make sure that we keep the link to that
Okay.
video. We put that in the show notes. But Andrea, look, thank you so much for being on the show and for your candidness, for being
You.
so open and vulnerable and authentic and real. I love that about you and your willingness to share your story and the story of your family. I appreciate it. And I wish you all the very best in the future. And I hope to connect again so that we can have an update and see where you're at and how everything is going with your family. And I love that your granddaughter is there living with you.
You too. Thank you. It's
Amazing. Well done to you. Thank you. And look forward to seeing you again in the future.
yes, me too. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.